Part 1. The girl they laughed at. The billionaire's grandson threw champagne in the maid's daughter's face, but he had no idea his grandfather was watching from the balcony. By the end of that night, one family would begin destroying itself, and the girl standing silently beside the broken champagne glass would become the most powerful person in the mansion. But at 7:12 that evening, Isabella Cruz still believed she was invisible. The Whitmore estate glowed like a palace against the dark Connecticut sky. 3 fountains sparkled beneath golden lights. Imported roses lined the marble driveway. Valets rushed between Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and black SUVs worth more than most people's homes. Inside, nearly 300 guests filled the ballroom. Politicians, CEOs, old money families, women covered in diamonds, men shaking hands over million-dollar deals while pretending tonight was about charity. It never really was. 17-year-old Isabella Cruz stood near the back hallway holding a silver tray of champagne glasses while trying not to make eye contact with anyone. "Keep your shoulders straight," her mother whispered beside her. Elena Cruz adjusted the sleeve of her housekeeping uniform quickly before another guest could complain about something imaginary. "You look nervous." "I am nervous." "You always are." "That's because rich people look at me like I'm contagious." Elena gave her a tired smile. "Then stop looking back at them." Isabella tried to smile, but her stomach twisted harder when laughter exploded across the ballroom. Ethan Whitmore had arrived. People noticed Ethan the way people notice sirens or fireworks. Loud. Flashy. Impossible to ignore. 24 years old. Perfect tuxedo. Perfect white smile. Perfect rich boy arrogance. 3 girls followed him through the ballroom while he accepted attention like oxygen. "There he is," one guest whispered. "Arthur's grandson. Future CEO. God, he looks exactly like his grandfather did." No, Isabella thought quietly. Arthur Whitmore had kind eyes. Ethan's eyes looked hungry. Ethan grabbed a champagne glass from Isabella's tray without even looking at her. Then he stopped. His eyes moved slowly back. Toward her face. Recognition. Not warm recognition. The dangerous kind. "Well?" Ethan smirked. "Look who escaped the laundry room." A few nearby guests laughed softly. Isabella lowered her eyes immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore." "Oh, come on," Ethan said loudly. "We grew up in the same house. You can call me Ethan." One of the blonde girls beside him frowned. "Wait, who is she?" Ethan took a slow sip of champagne while staring directly at Isabella. "She's the maid's daughter." The way he said it changed the air around her instantly. Not a person. A category. Something lower. "Oh," the blonde girl said awkwardly. Another guest leaned closer. "I thought she was staff." "She is staff," Ethan replied. More laughter. Isabella felt heat crawl into her face. Elena stepped forward carefully. "Sir, we should continue serving the guests." But Ethan ignored her completely. His attention stayed fixed on Isabella. "You still living in the guest house behind the gardens?" "Yes." "That's cute." Another laugh from the crowd gathering nearby. Isabella could already feel phones coming out. People loved rich people behaving badly. Especially when the victim looked powerless. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "You know what's funny? My grandfather likes you more than half this family." "Ethan," Elena warned quietly. "What?" he said innocently. "I'm complimenting her." But Isabella knew that tone. He wasn't finished. Not even close. Across the ballroom balcony above them, 78-year-old Arthur Whitmore stood silently beside the railing, one hand resting on his cane. Watching everything. Nobody noticed him yet. That's how Arthur preferred it lately. The old billionaire's health had declined rapidly over the last year. Publicly, the family claimed exhaustion. Privately, doctors used words like cardiac deterioration. Arthur looked down at Isabella standing frozen beneath the chandelier lights. He saw her trembling fingers gripping the tray tighter. He saw guests smiling at her humiliation. And slowly, something dark moved behind the old man's eyes. Downstairs, Ethan suddenly pointed toward the diamond necklace around one woman's throat. "Careful near Isabella," he joked. Loudly. "Something expensive might disappear." The crowd exploded laughing. Isabella froze. Elena's face went pale. The accusation hit harder because everyone understood what he was implying. Poor girl. Maid's daughter. Probably a thief too. "I didn't touch anything," Isabella said quietly. Ethan shrugged dramatically. "Relax. It's called humor." Then he looked around the room. "You people are so sensitive now." More laughter. One guest actually pulled out his phone fully now, recording openly. And that was the moment everything changed. Because Arthur Whitmore started walking downstairs. Part 2. The Billionaire's Secret. Arthur Whitmore did not raise his voice when he reached the ballroom floor. That was the terrifying part. The laughter slowly died on its own as guests noticed the old billionaire walking toward the crowd with his silver cane tapping softly against the marble floor. Tap. 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 Even Ethan's smirk faded slightly. Because in the Whitmore family, Arthur Whitmore was still the son everything revolved around. The company. The money. The power. The mansion itself. Without Arthur, none of them were important. And everyone in that ballroom knew it. Arthur stopped directly in front of Isabella first. Not Ethan. Not the guests. Her. His old blue eyes moved slowly toward the champagne dripping down the front of her black serving uniform. One shattered glass still sparkled near her shoes. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. The room fell silent. Isabella swallowed hard. "No, sir." Arthur nodded once. Then he finally turned toward his grandson. "What happened here?" Ethan forced out a laugh. "Nothing serious, Grandpa. Just people joking around." Arthur's face remained expressionless. "Did she look like she was laughing?" Nobody moved. Nobody even touched their drinks. That was Arthur Whitmore's real power. He could silence millionaires without raising his voice above a whisper. Ethan adjusted his tuxedo nervously. "You know how people are now. Everybody gets offended by everything." Arthur stared at him for several long seconds. Then he said something nobody expected. "Apologize." The word hit the ballroom like ice water. Ethan blinked. "What? You humiliated her publicly." Arthur's voice stayed calm. "Now apologize publicly." Several guests exchanged nervous looks. Phones were still recording. Victoria Whitmore suddenly appeared from across the ballroom, diamonds flashing around her neck. "Arthur," she interrupted smoothly, "I think everyone's overreacting." Ethan was clearly joking. Arthur did not even look at her. "I was not speaking to you." Victoria's smile stiffened instantly. The old billionaire turned back toward Ethan. "You embarrass this family more every year." That one landed hard. Ethan's face darkened with humiliation now. Especially in front of investors and socialites. "Grandpa, you're seriously choosing the maid's daughter over your own family?" Arthur's eyes sharpened immediately. "No," he said softly. "I'm choosing decency." The silence afterward felt suffocating. For one strange second, Isabella almost felt sorry for Ethan. Almost. But then he looked at her again with pure hatred behind his eyes. And she realized this wasn't over. Not even close. Arthur motioned gently toward Isabella. "Come with me." The entire ballroom watched in disbelief as the richest man in Connecticut walked away beside the maid's daughter while his own family stood frozen behind him. Elena looked terrified. Victoria looked furious. And Ethan looked like someone had slapped him in front of the entire world. Arthur led Isabella through a private hallway away from the music and cameras. The deeper they walked into the mansion, the quieter everything became. Finally, they reached Arthur's office. The room smelled like old books, leather, and cigar smoke. Massive windows overlooked the dark gardens outside. Framed photos covered the walls. Presidents, royalty, business leaders. And tucked quietly between them, a small photo Isabella recognized immediately. Her at 12 years old. sitting beside Arthur in the greenhouse laughing over spilled chess pieces. Isabella stared at it in shock. Arthur noticed. You remember that day? You kept losing on purpose. Arthur's mouth twitched slightly. I absolutely did not. For the first time all night, Isabella smiled a little. Arthur slowly lowered himself into the chair behind his desk. The movement clearly hurt him. His hands trembled slightly now. Age was catching him faster lately. You shouldn't have defended me, Isabella said quietly. Arthur looked genuinely confused. Why? Because now they'll hate me even more. Arthur leaned back slowly. They already hated you, Isabella. The honesty stunned her. Not cruel honesty. Tired honesty. The kind older people speak when they're too exhausted to lie anymore. Arthur studied her face carefully. Do you know why wealthy people like my family fear people like you? Isabella frowned slightly. People like me? People who grow up without luxury. Arthur folded his hands. Because you learn the value of things they never had to earn. Outside, distant laughter drifted faintly from the ballroom downstairs. Arthur looked toward the sound bitterly. My children grew up surrounded by private jets, yachts, vacations, servants. They inherited comfort before they inherited character. His voice hardened slightly. You know what you inherited? Isabella stayed quiet. Pain, Arthur answered for her. Responsibility. Watching your mother work herself sick while people treated her like furniture. He paused. And somehow, you still remained kind. That hit Isabella harder than Ethan's humiliation ever could. Because nobody rich had ever spoken to her like that before. Like she mattered. Arthur opened one desk drawer slowly and pulled out a thick folder. Financial documents. Company records. Legal papers. You asked me once why I never retired, he said quietly. You said the company still needed you. Arthur gave a humorless smile. No. The company needs saving from my own family. Isabella's stomach tightened. Arthur slid the folder slightly toward her. I've spent the last year discovering exactly who my children became after they started worshipping money more than people. She looked down at the papers nervously. Numbers. Transfers. Offshore accounts. Huge amounts of missing money. Arthur, she whispered. They think I'm dying too slowly to notice. His voice dropped colder now. But I notice everything. A long silence filled the office. Then Arthur asked the question that changed. Everything. If I told you this family's fortune was built on a lie. His eyes locked onto hers. Would you still stay? And downstairs in the ballroom, Ethan Whitmore was already planning how to destroy her. Part 3. The girl they wanted gone. By midnight, the humiliation video had already spread across social media. Not the entire confrontation. Just the part Ethan's friends wanted online. The maid's daughter standing frozen. The laughter. The champagne spilling across her uniform. The expensive guest smirking while she looked down in silence. Someone had even added music behind it. By morning, the comments were brutal. Gold digger. Attention seeker. She probably deserved it. Why was staff standing near guests anyway? Isabella stared at the phone screen inside the tiny guest house behind the Whitmore mansion, while her stomach twisted harder with every comment. Her mother reached over gently and took the phone away. Stop reading them. They don't even know me. They don't want to know you, Elena said quietly. That sentence hurt because it was true. Rich people already decided who mattered before conversations even started. And girls like Isabella usually lost before they even spoke. Outside the guest house window, landscapers trimmed hedges bigger than most apartments, while luxury cars rolled through the front gates of the estate. The Whitmores lived in another universe entirely. One where mistakes disappeared behind money. One where cruelty became entertainment. Inside the mansion, Victoria Whitmore was already furious. You embarrassed Ethan in front of investors, she snapped at Arthur during breakfast. Arthur calmly stirred sugar into his coffee. No. Ethan embarrassed himself. Victoria slammed her napkin onto the table. She's manipulating you. Arthur looked up slowly. A 17-year-old girl serving drinks manipulated an entire ballroom? She wants attention. Arthur's voice turned dangerously quiet. No. Your son wanted attention. That's why he humiliated someone weaker than him. Victoria's jaw tightened instantly. Daniel Whitmore finally spoke from the other side of the table. Dad, the board's nervous after last night. Arthur gave a dry laugh. The board should be nervous about the missing $12 million instead. Silence exploded across the room. Daniel's face lost color immediately. Victoria looked sharply toward him. What missing money? Arthur folded his newspaper calmly. Exactly. Then he stood slowly from the table and walked away before anyone could stop him. Upstairs in his office, Margaret Holloway was already waiting. Arthur closed the door behind him carefully. How bad is it? She asked. Arthur handed her another folder. Worse than I thought. Margaret scanned the documents quickly. Illegal transfers. Fake consulting contracts. Money disappearing through shell corporations. And nearly all of it connected to Daniel Whitmore. Arthur sat heavily in his chair. I built this company from one hotel in Boston, he said quietly. 48 years of work. Margaret looked up. And now your own children are stealing from it. Arthur stared toward the window. No, he whispered bitterly. They're eating it alive. Meanwhile downstairs, Ethan Whitmore was becoming obsessed. Because Arthur had never defended him the way he defended Isabella. Not once. And that humiliation burned hotter every hour. Ethan stormed into the pool house where two friends were replaying the viral video. There he is. One laughed nervously. America's favorite villain. Shut up. His friend paused the screen. You seriously think your grandfather's losing it over that girl? Ethan grabbed a whiskey bottle aggressively. He barely speaks to his own family anymore. Maybe because your family acts insane. Ethan glared at him. Watch your mouth. But deep down, Ethan feared the same thing. Arthur was changing. And somehow Isabella Cruz was connected to it. 3 days later, Victoria finally exploded. Elena and Isabella were polishing silverware in the dining room when Victoria walked in wearing a cream-colored designer suit worth more than Elena earned in 6 months. I want you both out of the main house by Friday. Elena froze. What? Victoria crossed her arms. The guest house belongs to staff. Isabella is not staff. The cruelty behind the sentence stunned even Elena. She's my daughter. Elena whispered. And she's becoming a problem. Isabella slowly stood. We've lived here 14 years. Victoria smiled coldly. And you should have remembered your place during every single one of them. At that exact moment, Arthur's voice came from the doorway. Interesting. Everyone turned instantly. Arthur stood leaning on his cane, eyes locked directly on Victoria. You're evicting the only loyal people left on this property? Victoria's confidence cracked slightly. Arthur, I was simply… No, he interrupted softly. You were revealing yourself. His breathing sounded weaker lately. Slower. But somehow more dangerous. Arthur looked toward Elena. Nobody is leaving this estate. Then his eyes moved to Isabella. Especially not her. Victoria's face hardened with humiliation. But before she could answer, Arthur suddenly grabbed the edge of the doorway sharply. His cane hit the floor. The color drained from his face instantly. Arthur! Elena rushed forward first. Not Victoria. Not Daniel. Not Ethan. Elena. Arthur collapsed before he hit the ground completely. And as Isabella knelt beside the billionaire while chaos exploded through the mansion, Victoria Whitmore realized something terrifying. Arthur trusted the maid's daughter more than his own blood. And she had no idea why. Part 4. The promise nobody knew. The ambulance lights painted the Whitmore mansion red and blue for nearly an hour. Rich people hated scenes like this. It ruined the illusion. The illusion that money protected families from fear. From sickness. From death. Inside the emergency room waiting area, Victoria Whitmore paced furiously in high heels while reporters gathered outside the hospital gates. Daniel sat staring at the floor silently. Ethan kept checking his phone every 30 seconds. But Isabella noticed something strange. None of them looked heartbroken. They looked nervous. Like Arthur's condition threatened something bigger than grief. Elena sat quietly beside Isabella holding her hand. "You okay?" she whispered. Isabella nodded automatically, but it was a lie. Seeing Arthur collapse had shaken her badly. Because for the first time in years, someone powerful had looked at her like she mattered. And now he might die. 3 hours later, Margaret Holloway arrived carrying 2 thick folders against her chest. The moment Victoria saw her, she stood immediately. "What's happening?" Margaret's expression stayed unreadable. "Arthur survived the cardiac episode." Relief swept through the room instantly. But Margaret continued before anyone could celebrate. "He's asking for Isabella." Complete silence. Victoria blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Margaret looked directly at Isabella. "He specifically requested her. Alone." Victoria laughed once in disbelief. "This is ridiculous." Margaret's tone sharpened. "No. What's ridiculous is how surprised you are." The hospital room upstairs was dim and quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. Arthur looked smaller in the bed somehow. Not weaker. Just older. More human. He motioned for Isabella to sit beside him. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Arthur smiled faintly. "You look terrified. You collapsed." "Yes. Very dramatic of me." She almost laughed. "Almost." Arthur's eyes softened. "You were the first one who ran toward me." "Of course I did." "No," Arthur whispered. "Not of course." That sentence lingered heavily between them. Arthur slowly reached toward the bedside drawer and pulled out a small photograph. The edges were worn from age. "You've never asked why your mother came to work for this family?" Isabella looked down at the picture carefully. A younger Arthur stood beside Elena near a private jet. Smoke filled the background. Emergency vehicles everywhere. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Arthur leaned back against the pillows slowly. 22 years ago, my private plane crashed during an emergency landing in Colorado." Isabella's eyes widened. "You were on it?" "I was supposed to die that day." His voice stayed calm, but distant now. Like he was walking through memory instead of speaking. "The company was drowning in debt back then. If I had died, Whitmore Global would have collapsed within months." He looked at the photograph again. "Your mother pulled me out before the fire reached the cabin." Isabella stared at him in shock. "My mom never told me this." She signed. Legal agreements afterward. The company buried the accident to protect investors. Arthur's jaw tightened slightly. "My own partners wanted the story hidden immediately. Stock prices mattered more than human lives." He paused. "But your mother stayed beside me in the hospital for 6 weeks." Outside the room, thunder rolled faintly across the dark sky. Arthur looked toward the window. "I offered her money afterward. She never took it." Isabella guessed. Arthur smiled weakly. "She told me decent people don't save lives for checks." That sounded exactly like Elena. Arthur's expression darkened slowly. "My children grew up surrounded by privilege. Your mother grew up with nothing and still understood loyalty better than all of them." Then he looked directly at Isabella. "And so do you." Isabella felt tears sting her eyes. Arthur reached slowly toward the second folder Margaret brought. Legal papers. Signatures. Official documents. "I spent the last year investigating my own family," he said quietly. "Daniel's drowning in debt. Victoria's been hiding money overseas. Ethan." Arthur closed his eyes briefly. Ethan learned cruelty because nobody around him ever punished it. The room felt colder suddenly. Arthur handed Isabella a sealed envelope. "What is this?" "A backup." Her stomach tightened instantly. "For what?" Arthur's voice lowered almost to a whisper. "For the moment this family realizes I'm no longer protecting them." Isabella looked at the envelope nervously. "I don't understand." "You will." Arthur's breathing slowed again. Tired now. Very tired. Before Isabella could speak again, Margaret quietly entered the room. Her face had changed. Something was wrong. Arthur, she said carefully. The board approved the emergency meeting. Arthur nodded once. Good. Margaret hesitated. Then she looked directly at Isabella. The will is ready. And downstairs in the hospital parking garage, Ethan Whitmore was secretly listening to everything. Part 5. The funeral. Arthur Whitmore died 4 days later at 4:17 in the morning. No dramatic final speech. No family gathered around his bedside crying. Just the quiet sound of hospital machines slowing down while rain tapped softly against the windows. Margaret Holloway was the only person in the room besides the nurse. By sunrise, every major business network in America had already interrupted regular programming. Arthur Whitmore dead at 78. Billionaire hotel tycoon passes away. Whitmore global stock expected to shake markets inside the mansion. The atmosphere changed instantly. Not grief. Calculation. Victoria Whitmore locked herself inside Arthur's office with Daniel before breakfast. Lawyers arrived before flowers did. Ethan spent the entire morning scrolling through social media reactions while pretending not to care. But Isabella noticed something else. Nobody mentioned Arthur like a father. Or grandfather. They spoke about him like an empire. What happens to voting control? Who inherits the board shares? What about the trust accounts? Money. Always money. Elena quietly prepared black dresses in the guest house while television helicopters circled the estate overhead. You don't have to attend the funeral, she told Isabella softly. But Isabella shook her head immediately. Yes, I do. Because unlike the others, she actually loved him. The funeral took place 3 days later at St. Bartholomew Cathedral in Manhattan. Black SUVs lined the streets for blocks. Police barriers held reporters back while cameras flashed nonstop. CEOs. Politicians. Celebrities. Every powerful person Arthur Whitmore ever knew seemed to appear beneath the gray cathedral sky. And standing near the back entrance in a simple black dress was Isabella Cruz. Completely alone. The difference between rich and poor felt brutal there. Women stepped out of luxury cars wrapped in diamonds worth more than Elena's lifetime salary. Meanwhile, Isabella adjusted the sleeve of a borrowed coat because she worried people would notice it wasn't new. As she and Elena approached the cathedral steps, Ethan suddenly blocked their path. You've got some nerve showing up here. His voice stayed low enough for cameras not to hear. Elena stepped protectively closer. We came to pay our respects. Ethan laughed bitterly. You mean collect sympathy? Isabella looked exhausted already. Arthur cared about us. No, Ethan snapped. He pitied you. That one landed hard. Because pity was the one thing poor people hated more than insults. Nearby reporters immediately noticed tension building. Phones turned subtly toward them. Ethan lowered his voice further. You know everybody's talking about you, right? Isabella stayed silent. They think you manipulated an old dying man. Elena whispered, Let's just go inside. But Ethan stepped closer to Isabella. You embarrassed this family enough already. Don't turn his funeral into another performance. Before Isabella could answer, another voice interrupted coldly. She has every right to be here. Margaret Holloway walked toward them holding a black leather folder tightly against her side. Victoria appeared immediately behind her. Margaret, she said sharply, this is not the place. No, Margaret replied calmly. Actually, it is exactly the place. Something in her tone made Ethan step back slightly. The funeral service itself felt surreal. Massive stained glass windows glowed above hundreds of grieving guests while stories about Arthur Whitmore filled the cathedral. Visionary. Titan. Philanthropist. Builder of empires. But Isabella kept remembering smaller things instead. Arthur feeding birds in the greenhouse. Arthur pretending to lose chess matches. Arthur secretly leaving books outside the guest house because he noticed she loved reading. Nobody else in that cathedral knew those versions of him existed. Halfway through the service, Isabella noticed Victoria whispering furiously to Daniel again. Panic. Real panic. Margaret saw it too. After the burial, the family gathered privately inside the Whitmore Estate library. Heavy rain slammed against the mansion windows while tension swallowed the room whole. Victoria crossed her arms immediately. Before this becomes uncomfortable, I think staff should leave. The word staff echoed cruelly. Margaret calmly placed a black folder onto Arthur's desk. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Daniel frowned. What's going on? Margaret looked directly at Isabella. Arthur requested her presence specifically. Ethan scoffed loudly. This is insane. No, Margaret said quietly. Then she pulled out an official sealed document. This is Arthur Whitmore's final will and testament. The room froze instantly. Even the storm outside suddenly seemed quieter. Victoria's voice sharpened. We already discussed inheritance months ago. Margaret met her eyes calmly. Yes. Then she broke the seal. But Arthur changed everything 48 hours before he died. And for the first time all day. Victoria Whitmore looked afraid. Part 6. The will changed everything. Nobody breathed when Margaret Holloway opened the envelope. Rain hammered the mansion windows while the Whitmore family sat frozen around Arthur's massive library table. The room smelled like old leather, whiskey, and tension. Ethan leaned back with forced confidence, but Isabella noticed his fingers twitching slightly against the armrest. Victoria looked pale. Daniel looked exhausted. And Elena still seemed uncomfortable even sitting inside the library at all. Poor people spent their entire lives feeling like guests inside wealthy spaces. Even after 22 years. Margaret adjusted her glasses carefully. Arthur Whitmore signed this revised will at 9:42 p.m. on Tuesday evening in the presence of 3 witnesses, 2 physicians, and legal counsel. Victoria interrupted immediately. This better not be another one of Arthur's emotional episodes. Margaret ignored her. Arthur Whitmore leaves the following properties, holdings, and controlling assets under Whitmore Global. She paused. Then looked directly at Isabella. To Isabella Cruz. Silence. Complete silence. For one full second nobody in the room even reacted. Because their brains literally refused to process what they heard. Then Ethan laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind people make when reality feels insane. Okay, he said slowly. Very funny. Margaret calmly continued reading. The Greenwich estate, including all surrounding land holdings. Victoria stood up instantly. No, 41% controlling shares of Whitmore Global. Daniel nearly dropped his glass. Arthur Whitmore Foundation assets totaling $80 million. Victoria slammed both hands against the table. No! Her scream echoed through the mansion. Elena looked horrified. Isabella herself couldn't even speak. Margaret finally closed the folder calmly. That concludes the primary inheritance allocation. Ethan stared at Isabella like she had personally murdered someone. You manipulated him. No, Margaret replied before Isabella could answer. Arthur made these decisions after discovering extensive financial misconduct within his own family. Victoria's face changed instantly. Dangerous now. You cannot seriously expect us to accept this. Margaret reached for a remote control on the desk. Oh, she said quietly. Arthur anticipated that reaction. The television screen above the fireplace flickered on. Static. Then Arthur Whitmore appeared sitting in this very library wearing a navy sweater. Recorded only days before his death. The room froze all over again. Arthur looked tired. But sharp. Completely sharp. If you're watching this, he began slowly, then I'm finally free of all of you interrupting me. Even Isabella almost smiled through the tension. Arthur's eyes moved directly toward the camera. My children inherited privilege and mistook it for character. Victoria looked sick. Arthur continued calmly. Daniel spent years stealing from the company while pretending to protect it. Victoria spent more time managing appearances than showing compassion. And Ethan. Arthur paused heavily there. You learned cruelty because your family applauded arrogance instead of correcting it. Ethan's face burned red instantly. Arthur leaned slightly closer toward the camera. But the greatest disappointment of my life was realizing the people who carried my name valued money more than humanity. Then his expression softened. And the greatest surprise of my life was discovering dignity inside the people this family treated like servants. Isabella's chest tightened painfully. Arthur smiled faintly now. Elena Cruz saved my life 22 years ago expecting nothing in return. He paused. Her daughter spent years walking through this house being ignored, insulted, underestimated, and somehow remained kinder than everyone sitting in this room. Victoria whispered angrily, "Turn this off." Nobody moved. Arthur continued. I built Whitmore Global from nothing. Not for spoiled inheritance wars. Not for greedy boardrooms. His voice strengthened slightly. I built it for people willing to protect others when nobody's watching. Then came the sentence that shattered the room completely. The only person in this family who never asked me for anything. Arthur looked directly into the camera. Was the maid's daughter. Ethan stood violently. This is garbage. Margaret's voice cut across the room instantly. Sit down. Shockingly, he actually did. Because for the first time in his life, Ethan realized nobody powerful was protecting him anymore. Arthur's video continued one final time. To Isabella. Her eyes filled immediately. You once asked why I trusted you. Arthur smiled sadly. Because power reveals character. And you handled powerlessness with more grace than wealthy people handle power. The old billionaire exhaled slowly. If this family attacks you after I'm gone. His eyes hardened suddenly. Finish what I started. The screen went black. Nobody spoke. Not immediately. Because the balance of power inside that mansion had just exploded. Then Victoria finally whispered the one sentence everybody in the room was secretly thinking. This girl just inherited our entire lives. And upstairs in Arthur Whitmore's empty bedroom, a hidden safe quietly waited behind the wall. Part 7. America hated her overnight. By morning, America had picked sides. Headlines exploded across every major media outlet. Billionaire leaves fortune to Maid's daughter. Whitmore family cut out of will secret heiress or manipulation? Social media became a war zone. Some people called Isabella inspiring. Others called her a scammer. Gold digger. Manipulator. Opportunist. The internet loved rich versus poor stories until the poor person actually won. Then people became uncomfortable. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere turned poisonous fast. Victoria stopped speaking to Isabella completely. Daniel locked himself inside Arthur's office making non-stop phone calls to lawyers. And Ethan looked at Isabella like she'd burned his entire future to the ground. Which honestly wasn't far from the truth. 3 days after the will reading, Whitmore Global stock dropped 11% after investors panicked over the inheritance chaos. News vans camped permanently outside the estate gates. Reporters shouted questions every time Isabella stepped outside. How does it feel to become a billionaire overnight? Did Arthur Whitmore secretly adopt you? Are the family's fraud allegations true? Elena hated every second of it. This isn't normal, she whispered one night inside the guesthouse kitchen. Isabella sat quietly scrolling through thousands of hateful comments online. Nothing about her life felt normal anymore. The rich people who ignored her before suddenly wanted interviews. The same society women who once looked through her now discussed her on television. And somehow, being wealthy felt lonelier than being poor. A sudden knock interrupted the silence. Margaret entered holding another folder. You need to see this. Inside were financial reports from Whitmore Global. Missing funds? Fake contracts. Luxury purchases hidden through shell corporations. Millions gone. Isabella looked stunned. How bad is it? Margaret exhaled slowly. Arthur underestimated how deep it went. At that exact moment, shouting erupted from the main mansion. Ethan's voice. Angry. Violent. Isabella rushed toward the sound before Elena could stop her. Inside the library, Ethan had Daniel cornered against Arthur's desk. "You lied to me!" Daniel looked exhausted beyond words. "Keep your voice down. You said the company was stable." Victoria stood nearby, pale and furious. "Enough." But Ethan ignored her completely. "You told me I'd take over someday." Daniel suddenly exploded. "There's nothing left to take over." Silence crashed into the room. Even Isabella froze. Daniel ran both hands through his hair desperately. "The debt's worse than anybody knows." Victoria snapped toward him instantly. "Daniel, no!" he shouted. Years of pressure finally broke loose all at once. "The company borrowed against future assets years ago. Arthur discovered it before he got sick." Ethan stared blankly. "What are you talking about?" Daniel looked toward Isabella bitterly. "Your grandfather didn't leave her an empire. He laughed once painfully. He left her a battlefield." That sentence changed everything. Because suddenly Isabella understood the truth. Arthur hadn't rewarded her with luxury. He trusted her with a collapsing empire nobody else deserved to control. Outside, cameras flashed endlessly beyond the mansion gates while reporters speculated about scandal and inheritance wars. Inside, Whitmore Global was quietly bleeding to death. And Isabella Cruz had just become responsible for saving it. Then Margaret slowly placed one final document onto the desk. Federal Inquiry Notice. FBI Financial Crimes Division. Daniel Whitmore's face lost all color. Because Arthur's investigation had not died with him. It had only just begun. Part 8. The empire started cracking. The FBI arrived at Whitmore Global on a Tuesday morning at exactly 8:11 a.m. Employees noticed the black SUVs before they noticed the agents. By 8:14, whispers had already spread across all 32 floors of the company headquarters. By 8:20, financial news channels were running breaking headlines. Federal investigation connected to Whitmore Global inside the executive conference room. Daniel Whitmore looked seconds away from collapsing. Two agents calmly placed folders onto the polished glass table, while attorneys filled the room with nervous silence. "We'll need access to all offshore transaction records dating back 6 years," one agent said. Victoria immediately stepped forward. "My husband has done nothing wrong." The agent didn't even look at her. "That determination won't be made by you." Across the room, Isabella stood quietly beside Margaret Holloway, trying to absorb how fast Arthur's world was unraveling. Because only now did she fully understand what Arthur had done before dying. He hadn't simply exposed corruption. He detonated it. Every secret. Every hidden transfer. Every lie. And he had left the explosion behind for Isabella to survive. Outside the building, reporters screamed questions while cameras flashed nonstop. Some employees looked terrified. Others looked relieved. That confused Isabella until Margaret leaned closer. "Arthur wasn't exaggerating," she whispered. "Many people inside this company knew something was wrong." Sure enough, by lunchtime anonymous internal emails started surfacing online. Stories about unpaid staff. Threats from executives. Manipulated accounting. Luxury bonuses during employee layoffs. The public mood shifted almost overnight. Suddenly the spoiled billionaire family looked less like victims and more like predators. Meanwhile, Ethan Whitmore sat alone inside his luxury penthouse staring at his phone in disbelief. Friends stopped answering him. Brands quietly paused partnerships. One nightclub owner publicly denied him entry after videos from the gala resurfaced online. For the first time in his life, Ethan experienced something unfamiliar. Consequences. That night he drove back to the mansion furious and half desperate. He found Isabella alone inside Arthur's greenhouse watering plants. The same greenhouse where Arthur used to play chess with her. "You happy now?" Ethan snapped. Isabella didn't even turn around immediately. "No." That answer caught him off guard. "You took everything." She finally faced him calmly. "Your family destroyed itself before I inherited anything." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Easy to say when you're rich now." The sentence lingered between them awkwardly. Because Isabella still didn't feel rich. She still remembered counting grocery money with her mother. Still remembered wearing second-hand shoes to school while classmates mocked her quietly. Money changed her address overnight. Not her memories. Ethan stepped closer. You think people respect you now? His voice lowered. They don't. They pity you. Same way Grandpa did. That one hurt. Because part of Isabella feared it might be true. But before Ethan could continue, another voice interrupted sharply. She earned more respect in 1 year than you earned in your entire life. Elena stood near the greenhouse doorway. Ethan rolled his eyes immediately. Please. But Elena didn't back down. And for the first time ever, Isabella saw something change in her mother. 22 years of silence had finally cracked. You grew up surrounded by everything, Elena said quietly. Money. Security. Opportunity. Ethan crossed his arms. And you still became cruel. The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Ethan looked away first. Not Isabella. Not Elena. Him. Because deep down, he knew she was right. The next morning, Whitmore Global's emergency board meeting turned into complete chaos. Several executives demanded Isabella step down immediately. She's inexperienced. She's emotional. She has no corporate background. Margaret calmly listened beside her while older men in expensive suits talked about Isabella like she wasn't sitting there. Rich people always claimed poor people lacked qualifications. Even when the rich themselves inherited everything. Finally, Isabella stood slowly. The room quieted almost instantly. You're right, she said calmly. I don't have your experience. Some executives smirked slightly. Then Isabella continued. I've never hidden money from employees. Silence. I've never fired workers while approving executive bonuses. Nobody spoke now. And I've never treated human beings like they mattered less because they clean rooms instead of owning them. That landed hard. Because many people in that room suddenly remembered Arthur saying almost the exact same thing. Isabella looked around the massive conference table. My grandfather built hotels. But the people who actually carried this company for decades were housekeepers, cooks, receptionists, maintenance workers, drivers. She paused. And none of them ever appeared on magazine covers. One older board member quietly removed his glasses. For the first time, someone inside that room sounded like Arthur. Not the billionaire version. The younger version people had forgotten. Then Margaret slid another document toward Isabella. Private employee approval data. Internal support numbers. 72% of Whitmore Global staff now supported Isabella remaining CEO. The executives looked stunned. Because the workers had chosen the maid's daughter over the billionaire family. And somewhere deep inside the mansion that night, Victoria Whitmore quietly opened Arthur's hidden safe. What she found inside nearly stopped her heart. Part 9. The Girl Who Stayed Kind. 1 year later, the Whitmore mansion no longer felt like a museum. For rich people pretending to love each other. It finally felt alive. The giant ballroom once used for cold charity galas now hosted scholarship dinners for working-class students. The guest house behind the gardens no longer housed exhausted employees. Isabella had it renovated into private family residences for long-time staff members. Full benefits. Free education programs. Healthcare support. Fair salaries. Simple things the old executives once called too expensive. Funny enough, Whitmore Global profits had risen anyway. Turns out people worked harder for leaders who treated them like human beings. The media still followed Isabella everywhere. But the headlines had changed. From Maid's daughter to CEO Isabella Cruz transforms Whitmore Global, the billionaire who changed corporate culture. Employees smiled when she walked through hotel lobbies now. Housekeepers hugged Elena in tears during company events. Receptionists stopped whispering nervously whenever executives entered rooms. The fear inside the company had slowly disappeared. And maybe that was Arthur's real inheritance all along. Not money. Dignity. One quiet afternoon, Isabella stood alone inside Arthur's greenhouse holding the same old chess piece he once let her keep after their first game. Rain tapped gently against the glass ceiling overhead. "You would have loved this," she whispered softly. "You were wrong about one thing, though." She smiled faintly. "I still hate chess." A voice behind her answered unexpectedly. "He let you win on purpose." Isabella turned. Ethan stood near the doorway wearing a plain dark jacket instead of expensive designer suits for once. Life had changed him too. Not perfectly, but visibly. The FBI investigation destroyed Daniel's career completely. Victoria quietly disappeared from public life after multiple financial scandals surfaced online. Several former executives faced criminal charges related to fraud and embezzlement. And Ethan lost almost everything money used to protect him from. For months, tabloids mocked him constantly. Former friends vanished overnight. People treated him differently the second his power disappeared. Now he finally understood what invisibility felt like. "I know," Isabella replied quietly. Ethan glanced around the greenhouse. "This place feels different. It's peaceful now." He nodded slightly. Then, after a long silence, he finally said the words nobody expected from him. "I was horrible to you." Isabella stayed quiet. Because some apologies arrived too late to fully heal anything. Ethan looked down at the floor. "When Grandpa defended you that night," he admitted softly, "I think I hated you because deep down I knew he was disappointed in me." That honesty surprised her. Not because it erased the past, but because rich people in that family almost never admitted fault. Ethan exhaled slowly. "You know what scares me most?" "What?" "That he trusted you for reasons I still don't fully understand." Isabella looked toward the rain outside the greenhouse windows. "No," she said quietly. "You do understand." He frowned slightly. She finally met his eyes. "He trusted me because I knew what it felt like to have nothing." That sentence lingered heavily between them. Because Arthur Whitmore spent his entire life surrounded by wealthy people terrified of losing comfort. But Isabella grew up learning how to survive without it. And maybe that was why power never poisoned her the way it poisoned everyone else. A week later, Isabella stood on stage in Chicago during the launch of the Arthur Whitmore Foundation National Scholarship Program. Thousands watched online. Students, parents, workers, people who saw themselves in her story. The lights felt warm against her face as cameras focused in. For a moment she remembered the charity gala from 1 year earlier. The laughter. The humiliation. The champagne running down her uniform while rich people watched silently. Then Isabella stepped toward the microphone. "They treated me like I was invisible," she said softly. The room became completely silent. "Not because I lacked value," her voice steadied stronger now, "but because my mother cleaned their floors instead of owning the building." Several people in the audience wiped tears quietly. Isabella smiled faintly. "But one man looked past money long enough to see my heart before my status." She paused. And that changed everything. Thunderous applause filled the ballroom. But far away inside the quiet greenhouse of the Whitmore estate, Arthur Whitmore's old chessboard still sat exactly where Isabella left it. One final game waiting beside the window. As if the old billionaire somehow knew. The maid's daughter would finish the story he started. 3 years after leaving prison, Ethan Whitmore no longer looked like the arrogant millionaire the world once hated. He worked quietly at a small auto garage outside Boston, keeping his head down and avoiding cameras. Most people didn't recognize him anymore, and he preferred it that way. Meanwhile, Isabella Cruz stood on the rooftop of Whitmore Global beside John, a young architect who made her laugh in ways money never could. For the first time in years, her smile felt effortless. One rainy evening, Ethan saw Isabella on television. She looked happy. And strangely, he smiled too. Because sometimes losing everything is the only way a person finally learns how to become human. Here's a heartfelt reflection and ending commentary in American English for your audience. People often think power and money are what make someone important, But this story reminds us that kindness, humility, and respect for others are the true things that define a person. I believe many people today feel invisible, just like Isabella once did, and sometimes a single act of compassion can completely change someone's life. What touched me most is that Arthur saw value in people that the world ignored. In real life, we should never judge someone by their status, clothes, or background because every person is carrying struggles we cannot see. I also believe success means nothing if we lose our humanity along the way. Ethan's downfall teaches us that arrogance and cruelty eventually destroy the person holding them. Meanwhile, Isabella proves that staying kind in a cold world is a form of strength. I personally think the world becomes better when ordinary people choose empathy instead of pride. If this story leaves anything behind, I hope it reminds us to treat people with dignity even when nobody is watching. Sometimes the smallest kindness creates the biggest legacy. From my personal perspective as the writer, I believe stories like this matter because they reflect emotional truths that exist in everyday life. I think many wealthy people forget how powerful simple respect can be. I admire Isabella because she never allowed pain to turn her cruel. I also feel sympathy for Ethan, because some people are raised with privilege but never taught emotional responsibility. In my opinion, loneliness exists at every social level, even inside massive mansions and powerful families. I believe Arthur realized too late that success without love creates empty generations. One thing I deeply believe is that children learn more from behavior than from money. I think many viewers will see parts of themselves in different characters from this story. Personally, I hope this story encourages people to value character more than status. And above all, I believe kindness is still one of the most powerful things a human being can leave behind. This story contains some creative elements and AI-assisted content, created for educational and entertainment purposes, with the goal of sharing meaningful life lessons, emotional inspiration, and positive human values with viewers. Disclaimer: the events, characters, and situations presented are intended for storytelling, reflection, and educational inspiration. Viewer discretion, personal interpretation, and individual perspectives may vary.